I'm the last living person that survived the fulcrum shift of 1975, and I'm detailing those events here before I pass. In short, fear the ACTTS 176 Protocol. Part 1. Mom, look, it's happening again. Emmy squealed, captivated by the viscous maple syrup slowly floating to the top of the upright bottle on the kitchen table, stubbornly defying gravity. My heart raced. Anxiety danced hectic circles around the base of my skull. My palms became damp. God, I didn't want to look. Me, as crazy as it may sound, the sight of that bottle physically repulsed me. Maybe I correctly sensed something terrible was on the horizon. Recognized the phenomena as the harbinger of death that it truly was. That said, the shift took place a long time ago. Half a century, give or take. Retrospection has a funny way of painting over the original truth of a memory. In other words, when enough time has passed, you may find yourself recalling events with thoughts and feelings from the present, inseparably baked into the memory. Picking that apart is messy business, what's original versus what's been layered on after the fact, if you can even tell the difference anymore. So trust me when I say that, I find it difficult to remember that morning objectively in isolation and removed from everything that came after. I mean, it's possible that I didn't feel what was coming beforehand. I could have just woken up pissed off that morning. That would certainly be enough to explain my strong reaction to Emmy's harmless excitement in my memory. What I'm getting at is this. I don't know that I can guarantee this story is 100% accurate. Not only that, but I'm the only one left to tell it, meaning my story is all anyone has. For better or worse, it's about to become sanctified history. If I'm being honest, I don't believe that I'm misremembering much. I can still almost feel the way the air in the neighborhood felt heavy and electric. In the days leading up to that otherwise unremarkable spring morning, I just knew something was desperately wrong, sensed it on the breeze like a looming thunderstorm. Like I said though, I'm the only person left to tell this story. The story they paid all of us survivors a great deal of money to keep buried. Emmy, for the love of God, put the damn thing back in the fridge and get your books together. I shouted, my tone laced with far more vitriol than I intended. We were already running late, and this wasn't the agreed upon division of labor. She was supposed to be packing her bag while I put her lunch together. That was the deal. Instead, my daughter had been irritatingly derailed by our own little eighth wonder of the world, the magic syrup bottle. It was unclear which part was magical though. Was the syrup supernaturally rising to the top of the container of its own accord? Or had the magic bottle enchanted the syrup, thus causing sugary globules to float like the molten wax of a lava lamp? Maybe the Guinness Book of World Records has a wizard on retainer that can get to the bottom of that question when they stop by to evaluate the miracle. I thought sarcasm aside. My aggravation was actually a smokescreen. It was a loud, flashy emotion meant to obscure what I was actually feeling deep inside fear. For an entire week, the syrup had been swimming against gravity, drifting above the air in the half-filled bottle against the laws of physics. I couldn't explain it, and that frightened me, but everything else was normal. The atmosphere was breathable. The landscape appeared unchanged. Grass grew, trees bloomed, birds flew. Our stomachs still churned acid, and our hearts continued to pump blood. The gears of reality kept on turning like they always had, excluding that one minuscule anomaly, an insignificant bending of the rules, but nothing more. So then why was I so damn terrified? Emmy scowled, swiped the bottle off the table, and returned it to the top shelf in the fridge with an angry clunk. With my demand obliged, she made a point of glaring at me over the door, a familiar combination of narrowed eyes, scrunched freckles, and tensed shoulders, an expression that screamed, "Are you happy now, asshole?" After a few seconds of unblinking silence, she slammed the fridge closed with enough force to cause a rush of air to inflate her burgundy earth, wind and fire t-shirt, a fitting climax to the whole melodramatic affair. The commotion brought Ben into the kitchen, tufts of curly brown hair and thick rimmed glasses cautiously peeking in from the hallway. Then he made the mistake of trying to defuse the situation. Before it was ready to simmer down, "I'm sure the bewitched syrup will still be here when you get home from school. Honey, unless your mother has a hankering for midday flapjacks. But the woman I married is definitely more of an eggs and bacon type of gal," my husband said with a warm chuckle. Neither Emmy nor I acknowledged the attempt at levity. Ben was insistent on cooling down arguments with humor. Sometimes I resented him for that. It made me feel like he saw himself as the friendly guy, perpetually forcing me to accept the role of disciplinarian by default. If he never took anything seriously, what choice did I have? I shot my husband. An annoyed glance as Emmy stomped past him. He sighed, rubbing his neck and putting his eyes to the floor, crestfallen. "Sorry, Hakura was just trying to help," he murmured. As he trudged out of the room, I said nothing, not a word, just watched him go, white-hot fire still burning behind my eyes. In my youth, I struggled with anger. I tried to control it, but the emotion overwhelmed my better instincts more often than not. I'm much older now, and since then, I've developed a tighter grasp on my natural temper. I think Ben would agree. At least, I hope he would. He wasn't around long enough to see me try harder, out of everything that was to come, out of all the horror that was to follow. I wish I could change that moment the most. In the decades that have passed, I've had thousands of dreams rewriting that snapshot in time. Instead of giving in to the anger, I swallow it and remind Ben I love him. A smile and a hug, or a comment about how handsome he is, a kiss on the cheek, or a peck on the lips, a light-hearted chuckle to match his own, something kinder than vexed silence. Thousands of those revisions have lingered transiently in my mind's unconscious eye, and when they do, I feel peace. Until I wake up, at which point those revisions are painfully sucked back into the blissful ether of sleep, and I'm forced to confront reality. That shitty moment was the last meaningful interaction I had with the love of my life. Minutes later, he'd be falling into the sky. All things considered, the start of that morning was decidedly run-of-the-mill. The blue, cloudless view overhead, a gentle spring breeze twirling over trees in the throes of reawakening cherry blossoms and magnolias budding triumphantly along their branches like fanfare to welcome the season. Our neighbors lining the streets and chit-chatting while awaiting the arrival of the school bus to see their kids off for the day, cups of hot coffee in hand, everything as it should be, and according to routine, with two notable exceptions. The atmosphere looked distorted like a grainy TV image, just barely coming through a finicky antenna. It was subtle, but it was there. I swear I could almost feel the gritty static dragging against my skin as I followed Emmy and Ben out the front door. And for some reason, Ulysses was outside. Between having no children and being an unapologetic recluse, our next-door neighbor's attendance at this before-school ritual was out of character. On top of that, the 60-something-year-old appeared distinctly unwell, bright red in the face, sweat dripping down his neck, eyes darting around their sockets like a pair of marble pinballs as he scanned the street from his front stoop. Per usual, Emmy bolted across the street as soon as she saw Regina, her childhood best friend standing among the growing crowd of kids and parents. Emmy and Regina were inseparable, two kids lovingly conjoined at the hip since the day they met. Recollecting the good times they had together never fails to conjure a beautiful warmth at the center of my chest. At the same time, that warmth is inevitably followed by a creeping sense of unease, a devil lurking in the details. That devil was looming behind Regina, smiling at my daughter as she approached Ben. Ulysses looks sick. I'm gonna go see how he's doing. Can you keep an eye on her Barrett's out today? He nodded and jogged after our daughter, needing no further explanation. 6 months prior to that morning, Regina's father, known locally as Pastor B, on account of his position in the local born-again parish, had slapped Emmy across the face for creating too much noise while running up the stairs in his home. In the wake of that, we forbade Emmy from spending time at Regina's. The girls really struggled with that decree, since it drastically cut down on the time they could be together. Regina was not allowed to spend time at our house because it was much too loose and unabashedly sinful. Seeing Emmy so depressed was absolutely killing us. Thankfully, Ben came up with the brilliant idea of walkie-talkies. The clunky blocks of black plastic he purchased at a nearby hardware store had quickly become the pair's primary mode of socializing when they weren't outside or at school together. We pleaded for the sheriff to charge Barrett with assault. His response was something to the tune of, "No, I'm confident there's been a misunderstanding." When we asked how there could possibly be a misunderstanding regarding a grown man slapping our daughter, he replied, "Well, because Pastor B said there was a misunderstanding. That's all the proof I need." Religious figures, especially where we lived, held a lot of sway in the community, got away with way more than they should have. Even more so in the 70s. Ben and I were beyond livid with the sheriff's inaction. That said, there didn't seem like much else we could do about the incident, except support our daughter through it. The first night she cried her heart out. By the next morning, though she wasn't very interested in talking about it, despite our gentle attempts to coax her into a longer conversation about the trauma, initially we were worried she was holding too much in, but we developed another, certainly more unorthodox means of catharsis and healing. Brainstorming demeaning nicknames for Barrett with Emmy proved to be a surprisingly effective coping strategy. Brought some much-needed comedy to the situation Ben came up with. Pastor Bald, on account his sleek, hairless scalp. Personally, I was more fond of my admittedly less sterile contribution, Reverend Dipshit, confident that Emmy was being watched after I paced across our yard to Ulysses. He was standing still as a statue at his open front door, 1 foot inside 1 foot on his stoop. As I approached, he barely seemed to register my presence. Although his eyes had been darting around the block only a minute prior, they weren't anymore. Now his gaze was squarely fixed on the developing crowd of teenagers and parents at the bus stop. In an attempt to get his attention, I gave Ulysses a wave and a friendly, "Good morning, long time no see." I guess he saw the wave in his peripheral vision, but the man skipped right over pleasantries in response. Instead, he asked me a question that immediately set off a veritable factory full of alarm bells in my head. I thought the school bus came at 8. No, I was sure it came at 8. Why is everyone out now? It just turned 7:25. He said the words trembling like a small dog, neck deep in snow. Sweat continued to pour down his face, practically drenching the collar of his pure white button-down. Well, the school board changed it to 7:30. A few weeks ago. Ulysses, are you all... Before I could finish my sentence, a deep, animalistic scream arising from the down the street interrupted me. Reflexively, I swung my body around, trying to identify the source. There was a man on the asphalt, gripping his head while writhing from side to side in a display of unbridled agony. From my vantage point, I couldn't tell exactly who it was emitting the noise, but I watched a few of the parents detach from the larger group, sprinting to the wailing man's aid. For a moment, I found myself completely immobilized, stunned by the harrowing melody of his pain. Couldn't move an inch. Being subjected to that degree of raw, undiluted torment had seemingly unplugged each and every one of my nerves from their sockets. An unexpected crash from behind me quickly rebooted my nervous system, dumping gallons of adrenaline into veins in the process. I spun back around, nearly tripping over myself on account of the liquid energy coursing through me, which was overstimulating my muscles to the point of incoordination. Ulysses had slammed his door shut. He shouted something to me, but I can't recall what he said either. I couldn't hear it, or I wasn't capable of internalizing it. Amongst the chaos, it just didn't stick in my memory. Under the guidance of some newly activated primal autopilot, I didn't attempt to clarify the message. Instead, my legs transported me towards the distress I needed, to make sure Emmy was safe. Nothing more, nothing less. God, I wish I remember what he said. Aye, cool. 30 seconds later, I placed a hand on Emmy's shoulder, startling her to high heaven and back. She yelped, gripped by a body-wide spasm that started from her head and radiated down. "Hey, just me, kiddo," I said, trying to sound reassuring as opposed to panic-stricken. A silky black ponytail flipped over her shoulder as she turned around. Without hesitation, she sank into arms, hot tears falling down my collarbone as she quietly wept. There's something wrong with Mr. Baker, Mom. I'm a little ashamed to admit it, but I don't remember much about Mr. Baker. All I can recall is that he was a mild-mannered Vietnam veteran that lived a few houses down from us. Opposite to Ulysses, I think he suffered from a serious injury. Abroad, may have retained a fragment of a bullet somewhere in his head, requiring him to use a cane while walking around. I'm not completely sure of any of that though. Don't remember his first name. Don't recall if he had a family or not. But I remember those words that Emmy said to me clear as day. I imagine the phrase, "There's something wrong with Mr. Baker." Mum sticks out in my brain as a byproduct of the trauma that immediately followed. There's a terrible piece of wiring in our species that causes traumatic events to be remembered as vividly as humanly possible. Once imprinted, they seem to become a meticulous blow-by-blow recreation of the incident that we'd kill, to forget every detail painstakingly etched into our psyche, some impossibly elaborate mosaic painted on the inside of our skulls, all-encompassing and inescapable like the creation of Adam on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Emmy said, "There's something wrong with Mr. Baker, Mom," and I saw Ben a few yards away from us, kneeling over Mr. Baker, altruistic to a fault. Then the crackling explosion of a gunshot rang through the air. The street erupted into chaos. People fled in all directions. I grabbed Emmy tightly by the wrist. She was paralyzed. Had to make her to start moving towards the house. Practically everyone was screaming in horrible solidarity with Mr. Baker. Someone elbowed me hard in the diaphragm, knocking the wind out of my lungs. Eventually, our feet landed on the sidewalk in front of our home. Then a second gunshot. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, nor did I see anyone injured. A few steps away from the door, I noticed something else. The air felt increasingly palpable, thick and granular, like I was wading through an invisible sandstorm. Once Emmy was inside, I immediately turned around to search for Ben. When I spotted him, my heartbeat became erratic. It floundered and thrashed inside my chest like the dying movements of a beached shark. Between the elbow to my diaphragm and the sheer terror of it all, I could feel myself gasping and panting, anchoring my hand to the doorframe to prevent myself from keeling over. He was halfway across the street, pulling Mr. Baker towards our house. To this day, I'm not sure if he was aware of the sedan barreling down the road, going entirely too fast to brake in time. I met my husband's eyes. Waves of disbelief pulsed down my spine, sharp and electric. I don't recall him looking scared. No, Ben was focused. He got like that when something important was on the line. Before I could even call out, the runaway car was only a few feet from crushing the both of them. Then a tainted miracle. An experience that lies somewhere between divine intervention and a cruel practical joke. The front of the car spontaneously tilted upwards like it was starting to drive up the big first incline of an unseen wooden roller coaster. Somehow, it barely cleared both Ben and Mr. Baker in the nick of time. It hovered over them, cloaking their bodies in its eerie shadow. Then it just kept going farther and farther into the atmosphere without any signs that it would eventually return to the earth. Before I was able to feel even an ounce of relief, it all started to happen, the shift. In order to understand, I need you to imagine you're currently living on the inside of a snow globe. Not only that, but you've actually unknowingly lived in a snow globe your entire life. One that's been sitting on the top shelf of some antique shop, completely untouched by human hands for decades. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that I was trapped in a massive snow globe half a century ago. I just cannot come up with a better way to explain this next part. As the car disappeared into the horizon, it's like someone finally reached up to the top shelf and picked up that dusty snow globe, only to promptly flip it over and hold it upside down. Slowly but surely, everything that wasn't directly attached to the ground began to fall into the sky. Other cars, family pets, and other animals, cherry blossom petals, people, neighbors, children, adults, Mr. Baker, Ben, almost me too. Luckily, I was far enough in the house where when I fell, my lower body remained inside. Hit my back pretty hard against the top of the door frame. I heard Emmy screaming behind me, along with the crashing of our furniture colliding into the ceiling. Our grand piano was heavy enough to make a hole through the roof, causing the sky below to leak into our home as it fell. Dazed, my vision spinning, I lifted my head just in time to witness the love of my life careen into an ocean of blue, cloudless sky. It was painfully quiet at that point. Those that fell were far enough away that I couldn't hear their pleads for mercy, or their death rattles, if they were still alive at all. Ben got smaller and smaller and smaller, a smudge to a dot to nothing at all. Gone in an instant, swallowed by something I couldn't possibly hope to comprehend. At precisely 7:30 a.m. that morning, the world shifted. The ground had become the sky, and the sky had become the ground. The snow globe flipped, so to speak. I apologize, but I need to pause for now. Putting these memories into words for the first time has been more emotionally challenging than I anticipated. Once I rest, I'll be back to finish this. I'm posting it, incomplete, on the off chance I don't make it till the morning. Better to have something out there as opposed to nothing at all. My follow-up should be soon, I imagine. After I post this, someone who was involved in the shift will be notified that I'm breaking the terms of our agreement, the silence that they paid very good money for 50 years ago. So I'll be sure to complete this before they have time to find me. Part 2. Have you ever experienced disbelief so powerful that it's broken you? If you have to think about the question, if a particular memory doesn't erupt to the forefront of your mind, like it was shot out of a cannon, if you're second-guessing your answer for even a moment, trust me when I say that you haven't and you're not missing out. Count yourself as fortunate, actually. There's nothing positive to be gained from the experience of reality-wide disintegration. And for the curious among you, I'm going to do my best to explain it anyway. For those unfortunate souls who have been where I've been, God, I'm so sorry. You see, that level of raw bewilderment isn't even a feeling. It's not something that washes over you like rage or sorrow. No, It's a place your consciousness goes to hide from the existential discomfort of it all. But that place has a steep price of admission. Mind-breaking disbelief is a vampire shaped like a pure white room, a cage completely suffused with perfect colorless light illumination, so overwhelming that it's blinding, and it feels like you're in the dark. Time is a suggestion. Seconds only lurch forward when the mood suits them. A blink of the eye can last a minute or a millennium. It seems like you can move through the room, but you get nowhere though. I'm not sure if that's because its confines are impossibly vast, or if it's actually the size of a broom closet, and the sensation of being able to move is a lie, an illusion, a trick of the light. But when push comes to shove, you have to do something, even if it's ultimately futile. So you pick a direction and start walking. And while you're sunk in that maze, its walls and their light are draining you, bleeding away some crucial part of yourself you'll never get back. Eventually, though, like any vengeful god, it gets bored with your misery and casts you aside, lets your soul trickle back into your flesh. The soul that's delivered back to your listless, waiting body isn't the same as it was before, though. It's irreparably fractured, a shattered clay pot that's been hastily glued back together, malformed and fragile. When I was delivered back, finally freed from that blood-sucking pocket universe, my head was still hanging over the side of the door frame, gazing down into the cerulean abyss that used to be our cloudless sky. There was something wrong though, aside from the devastatingly obvious, other than the cold, ethereal whisper of the swirling atmosphere. The world was silent. Where in God's name was Emmy? I shot to my feet using the hinge of the door to pull myself vertical. Once I was upright, I found myself immediately possessed by a blistering vertigo, and that was almost the end of me. My head was spinning, my vision blurry, and the top of the door frame where I stood was thin, only a few precious inches of footing available for me to wobble on. As my eyes adjusted to the surreal view, our street now a ceiling to the heavens with the blue sky below, I nearly toppled forward, reflexively with rapid heartbeats thundering against my throat. I threw my right foot backward. My heel reached out, feeling for some sort of level ground condition to expect there would floor behind me to latch onto. Of course, that expectation was born from the old state of the universe. When my foot found no purchase, I tumbled spine first into the atrium above our doorway. Thankfully, the distance to that curved alcove wasn't too far. I plummeted a few feet down, and an overturned doormat cushioned my landing. The only serious injury I sustained was a laceration to the point of my elbow as it crashed through a boxed lighting fixture at the center of the atrium, sending shards of glasses flying in all directions. I groaned, my body painfully contorted in the small, awkwardly shaped pit. Initially, I struggled to get to my feet again. The shift had tossed my body and mind around like a rag doll, and exhaustion was accumulating fast. A whimper from deeper inside the house revitalized my efforts. However, Mom, where are you? Emmy was alive. Scrambling up the curves of the atrium caused my sneakers to squeak against the dry plaster of the ceiling. Splinters of glass cut and tore into my palms as I crawled, but I kept pushing, moving on all fours like an animal. Eventually, I was high enough for my fingers to grasp the edge of the pit, and I pulled my trembling body over, anchoring two throbbing biceps across the boundary to steady myself. My eyes scanned the absurdist nightmare that used to be my living room until they landed on my daughter. To my immediate relief, she appeared intact. Emmy was lying on her back, about halfway between me and the entrance to the kitchen. On the opposite side of the room, there was a colossal piano-shaped hole to her right, where the instrument had exploded through the roof of our one-story home. Various pieces of furniture were scattered haphazardly around the ceiling. turned floor as a result of the shift, but by the looks of it, none of the heavier items had landed on her Emmy. "Just stay where you are. Don't move, I'm coming to you," I shouted. With a pained grunt, I forced my body up and over the edge and slowly lowered myself down onto the ceiling. In the past, I had lamented to Ben about how flat the roof was. Our home was fairly stout too, no more than 15 feet tall, if I'm remembering correctly. The combination of those two features made the space feel compressed, boxy and lifeless, like we were all incarcerated in the same oversized federal prison cell. In that moment, however, I couldn't have been more grateful for those inert dimensions, as they made getting to Emmy easy. I can't imagine how treacherous it would have been to navigate a vaulted ceiling post-shift. After about a minute of carefully wading through the demolished remnants of our life, stepping over eviscerated photos and broken heirlooms, I found myself kneeling over Emmy, running my hand through her hair as hot tears welled under my eyes. It wasn't long before she asked that dreaded question. I felt the blood drain from my face and I stopped stroking her hair. I didn't feel ready, but I suppose no one who's been in that position ever does. "Where's Dad?" After much consideration, I've decided to leave the few hours that followed my answer to that question out of this record. It's not that I have any difficulty recalling it. Quite the contrary. The memories have remained exceptionally vivid. I still suffer from the faint reverberations of that afternoon to this very day, half a century later. You just can't shed grief that profound. But unlike the reality-breaking disbelief of the shift, profound grief is an inevitable part of life. Everyone loses a parent at some point, and very few are satisfied with the time they were allotted when they pass. To that end, I don't feel like I need to dwell on it. You all know what it's like to some degree. Not only that, but failing to immortalize those moments means they finally will dissipate. When I die, I'll take the memories and their reverberations with me, and then there will be nothing left of them for anyone to feel. And I find a lot of solace in that thought. In the early evening, out of tears and unsure what to do next, Emmy and I were sitting next to each other on the perimeter of the piano-shaped hole. We had spent a small fraction of the afternoon theorizing about what had caused the shift, but the exercise felt decidedly futile. I mean, where do you even start existence? As we knew, it had been fundamentally redefined. Essentially, we gave up before the topic could stir us into a panic. So instead, Emmy and I silently tossed shards of glass through the hole, vacantly watching them disappear into the sky, which had transitioned from the bright blue of a cloudless day to the dimmer pink-orange of twilight. Like skipping stones that never seemed to bounce off the surface of the water. It wasn't peaceful, but it was quiet. There just wasn't much else to do with ourselves. The TV was broken from the shift, and the phone lines were dead. Our options were limited. The activity killed time until whatever was next came to pass, if there was anything next. Maybe this is it. Maybe all of this is just permanent. I contemplated eventually. Out of the graven tranquility, a familiar voice materialized, laced with static and fear. "Emmy. Are you there? Can you hear me?" "Over." Regina said, her whispers crackling through the nearby walkie-talkie. My daughter sprung to her feet and practically sprinted over to her open backpack a few yards away. Hey, Emmy, careful." I yelled after her, but it's like she couldn't hear me. The words simply couldn't reach her. She was impenetrably elated. Instead of digging through the backpack, Emmy elected to just turn the bag upside down and dump its contents, desperate to find the walkie-talkie. Books and pencils clattered loudly around her until the blocky device finally appeared at her feet. I stepped over and placed a reassuring hand on my daughter's shoulder, apprehensive about what we could possibly hear next. This is conversation as I remember it. I've removed all the concluding overs for readability's sake. Emmy, Regina. Oh my God. Are you okay, Regina? Yeah, I'm okay. I think twisted my ankle when it all, happened. But otherwise, I'm okay. There was a pause. Emmy was overcome with emotion, but didn't want to upset Regina by transmitting that over the line, Regina. Do you guys really think this is the rapture? A slithering sort of fear wormed its way into my skull. That word wasn't one a 14-year-old would choose to say on their own. It sure sounded like something Barrett would say, though. I tapped Emmy on the shoulder and put out an open palm, gesturing for her to hand me the walkie-talkie. Thankfully, she obliged. Me hey Regina, it's Emmy's mom. What makes you say that? Are you safe, Regina? Well, it's all my dad's been talking about it. He keeps saying how the good Lord is trying to empty his pockets of us, and God's trying to drop us into heaven by making the world upside down. Also that, well, he already made everyone else into angels down there. You can see it, can't you? Her speech became more and more frantic as she recalled the ad-libbed sermon Pastor B had been giving since the shift. By the end, the words had started to jumble incomprehensibly together. Okay, sweetie, I understand, I do. No, I really don't think this is a rapture. I don't know what it is, if I'm being honest. All I know for certain is that I'm glad you and Emmy are still here with me. 30 seconds passed. No response. Me. Regina, are you there? Another 30 seconds, I could feel Emmy pacing nervously behind me. I was about to click the button and ask again, but finally a voice came back through the receiver. Barrett, what kind of loathsome notions are you trying to plant into my daughter's head, Hakura? My heart turned to solid concrete and hurtled through the bottom of my chest. Me Barrett, where's Regina? Another 30 seconds or so passed. Barrett, I suggest you look down, Hakura. Really look down, both into heavens and into the black depths of your craven soul. This rapture is woefully incomplete, but I hope we can reconcile that together. As a spiritual family, Barrett. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect on the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Me, Barrett, let Regina talk again. Nothing. Me, Barrett, please, just let Emmy talk to Regina again. Nothing. We wouldn't hear from either of them until the following morning, and it wouldn't be through the walkie-talkie. We'd hear Barrett at his front door with a megaphone, Regina at his side, trying to convince the remaining survivors to dive into the heavens, thereby completing the rapture. It took a long while to calm Emmy down, but once she soothed. My daughter was out cold for the rest of the night. Utter exhaustion is one hell of a sleep aid. As she slept, I softly made my way into Emmy's bedroom. While in middle school, she and Regina had gone through a very cute astronomy phase. Puberty eventually beat the hobby out of both of their systems, as it tends to do with any passion that can be perceived as even slightly nerdy. But I knew she still had a semi-expensive telescope. We got her for Christmas in her closet, the same model that Regina had, as a matter of fact. Before the shift, they'd covertly stargazed together, marveling at the constellations over their walkie-talkies in the dead of night. Emmy was under the impression Ben and I hadn't noticed, and we certainly didn't let on that we had. She would have been mortified to be caught doing something so childish. I needed it, because what Barrett said earlier that afternoon had really lodged itself into my brain. He already made everyone else into angels down there. You can see it, can't you? I suggest you look down, Hakura. Really look down. I wouldn't be able to fall asleep until I looked, so I quietly positioned the telescope next to the piano-shaped hole, tilted the lens down into the heavens, and peered through the eye hole. After less than a second of gazing into the magnified depths of the starry sky below, I jumped backwards, slapping a hand over my mouth to muffle an involuntary gasp. Impossibly far away, I saw the sedan that had nearly crushed Ben and Mr. Baker. Nothing that had fallen was actually gone. Nothing had simply drifted off into space. From what I can remember, it appeared as if an invisible, perfectly linear net had caught all of the debris. As I stepped forward and peered through the telescope again, my hands quavering, as it adjusted the view, I saw it all. Every object, every animal, every person, all motionless on the same sheet of atmosphere, stuck to some imperceptible barrier, a massive cosmic bulletin board of all the things and all the lives that had been lost to the shift. And I could almost understand how Barrett saw them as angels. They all looked untouched, certainly dead, don't get me wrong, but they didn't appear physically damaged. The corpses hadn't splattered like they would have if they fell to the ground at that same distance. No rot, no decay at all. Granted, it had only been about 16 hours, but they all looked unnaturally pristine for being dead for even that amount of time. If I didn't know any better, I'd say their skin almost shimmered, a bit too faint. Rhythmic light seemed to pulse below their flesh, and after a few minutes of searching, I found him. I saw Ben. An hour later, I returned the telescope to Emmy's room. She didn't need to know what I'd seen. While out of earshot, I clicked the walkie-talkie back on, lowered the volume, and began turning the knob towards the frequency Emmy and Regina used to communicate. It was a long shot, but I wanted to see if Regina was somehow in a position to respond. Before I reached that frequency, though I unintentionally eavesdropped on another clandestine message, I wouldn't be 100% sure of its relation to the shift until the following morning. It was a male voice, monotone and emotionless. Maybe it was Ulysses, maybe it wasn't. All I know is it kept repeating the same message with a slight variation every 60 seconds on the dot. I caught the first transmission halfway through, so what I heard sounded like this: S176 protocol pending fulcrum, 9:57, 60 seconds, ACT S176 protocol pending fulcrum, 9:56, 60 seconds, ACT S176 protocol pending fulcrum, 9:55, 60 seconds. Dalefo. I just had an epiphany. Earlier, I needed to Google the exact wording of that Bible verse Barrett recited to me over the walkie-talkie, since I only recalled bits and pieces of it. The process took a little while. Eventually, I found it. At that time, people will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and he will send his angels and gather his elect on the four winds from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. Mark 13:26-27. While I was scouring through a list of all the different books in Bible for the quote, though I stumbled upon something else. The last 50 years I've assumed ACTS was an acronym, and 176 was some sort of way to catalogue whatever the acronym stood for. I may have been wrong. Now I need to consider what it could mean before going forward and finishing my recollection. Acts 17:6. But when they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some brethren to the rulers of the city, crying out, "These who have turned the world upside down have come here too." Part 3, Acts 17:19-23. About 10 verses after the passage that mentions the men that turned the world upside down. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know therefore what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing, except telling or hearing something new. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, "To the unknown God." There are plenty of variations of the Bible, each with their own nuances and modified passages, but as far as I can tell, none of them contain additional mentions of the unknown. God note. The language the scripture uses here too. It's not an unknown God, no. It's the unknown God. 23 hours after the shift, a booming metallic voice unexpectedly cut through the atmosphere, brothers and sisters. We stand together on the precipice of paradise. Blissful eternity awaits all, each and every soul here. The good Lord only asks one thing of you in return. Barrett paused. A shrill crackle from his megaphone followed. The harsh sound underscored the severity of his next statement. Faith. Your God desires a show of faith. Not even a leap of it, mind you. Just one. Single. Step survivors began crawling out of the woodwork to bear witness to his deadly sermon. Janile, an elderly Italian widower who lived next door to the pastor, peeked her head out of a flipped window, light brown hair, accented with a black splotch of crusted blood that dyed the right side of her scalp. Further down the overturned street, a young boy appeared at their doorframe, conspicuously alone, curling their small body over the side of the partition to see Barrett evangelize. The rumble of a lifting garage door 2 houses east of ours revealed a mother, cradling an infant in her right hand, the other held limply to her side, concealed under a disorderly mess of gauze and tape. There were many more spectators present. I just don't recall as much about them. I may have even glimpsed Ulysses spying through his drawn shutters, but I'm not confident in the veracity of that detail, given what I discovered later that morning and the way those discoveries color the man in my memory. Vicious anxiety gnawed at the back of my eyes as I watched the pastor's weary flock grow, which was only made worse by my inability to provide a counter-argument without the amplification of something like a megaphone. A few minutes into Barrett's homily, the sky began to emit an ominous noise, a low, shuddering buzz, like if you were to record the thumping of helicopter blades and then replayed the sound at 1/5. The speed. That sequence of events was an untimely coincidence. The noise both heightened the inherent drama of his sermon and seemingly gave credence to the pastor's claims of an unfinished rapture, accompanied by the howling of an angry God. I ran my vocal cords ragged, screaming my own message, imploring the survivors to just hold out a little longer, but no one could hear me over the crescendoing drone. Listen now. Do you hear the humming of our God below, the seething vibrations of the divine? I hate to tell you folks, but his mighty displeased told me as much during prayer. You've all been called home, and yet, out of sheer ignorance or unfathomable cowardice, you've chosen to remain. Barrett dropped the tone to a deep snarl, creating a strange and terrible harmony between his voice and the bellowing of our sunken sky as he spoke. You see, I am but a messenger. I, or should I say, we, he proclaimed, wrapping a lecherous claw around Regina's shoulder, have only remained to deliver that message. But we do not intend to remain much longer. Jump into the arms of your Lord or accept damnation. Each raspy syllable of Barrett's concluding remark felt like a separate sucker punch to the chest. Perched within our door frame, I was too far away to see the details of Regina's expression, sitting on the precarious verge of her home's shattered living room window next to him, 2 pairs of feet dangling over the vaporous chasm. That said, I didn't need to catalogue the tremors of her lips or the paleness of her skin to understand the liquid terror pulsing through her veins. God, I just felt it. I shut my eyes and tried to steady my grip on the unlit signal flare procured from our home's emergency kit. Maintaining concentration was going to be key. Even if we were to get everyone's attention, though Regina's chances of survival looked grim, I found myself imagining her screams as she plunged into the orange moor of the morning sky. Brooding terror washed over my body like a high fever, numbing my muscles and polluting my thoughts. Emmy already lost Ben, though for her sanity Regina needed to live. The memory of my husband pulling an ailing Mr. Baker across the street and towards our home suddenly flashed into my mind's eye. His resolute, selfless focus became a beacon. With every ounce of determination I had left, I held it there. Trapped the image in my skull long enough that it became almost tangible, like luring a ghost into the physical world with a Ouija board when the memory was so vivid that it felt nearly alive. I could sense Ben was with me. He leapt from the confines of the immaterial and into action, valiantly driving my terror away, forcing it to billow out of my lungs as I exhaled like a thick puff of black smoke dispersed by a gust of wind. Once the last atom of fear had rippled through spaces between teeth, the memory of that great man receded into the background, distant, but never truly gone. I opened my eyes and watch turned to 7:14 a.m. As if on cue, I heard a voice lapse through the walkie-talkie, which was propped up against the wall of the overturned atrium, next to Emmy ACT S176 Protocol Fulcrum. Imminent. Joe. 16 minutes until something happened. I leaned my head over shoulder and shouted down into the atrium. Emmy, how's it going down there? Just painting the last word now. She shouted back, her inflection raw and cracking with emotion. When my gaze returned to the pastor and his weary flock, I knew we were running out of time. Genillier had begun to squeeze herself through the window. On paper, the process might sound peaceful. An elderly woman brimming with faith and conviction, voluntarily letting go of this world, with a graceful flick of her heel plummeting into a vast ocean of warm sunlight, with a smile on her face and a song in her heart. Some sort of perverse advertisement for euthanasia. Like with most things, however, theory didn't even loosely match reality. Because of her advanced age, she wasn't strong enough to pull her body up to a sitting position on the window, its edge about, at the level of her sternum. I could tell that her panic was growing with every failed attempt, as each subsequent attempt was more reckless and frenzied, like she believed her ticket to heaven was gradually drifting away, slipping further from her fingertips with each passing second. Eventually, Genillier tried throwing herself at a 45-degree angle rather than straight forward, which caused the side of her hip to crash into the windowsill with enough force that the resulting bounce propelled her over the edge. Unfortunately, because of Genillier's diagonal orientation, the crux of her ankle hooked onto the corner of the window as she exited. As a result, the woman discharged two unbridled shrieks of pain. One, when the bones in her feet were crushed by her own weight, and another, when the circular motion caused by her latched extremity resulted in her forehead colliding against the solid brick below the window. Mercifully, her leg slipped out behind her after that. By that point, she was either knocked into unconsciousness dead, or I simply couldn't hear her screams anymore as she fell further and further into the sky. As I watched her body vanish within the horizon, I noticed something new stirring within it. The air below us had become alive with waves of fuzzy grey sediment, like seeing the stars of lightheadedness without feeling dizzy. A seemingly endless array of faint sparks formed a veil across the morning sky. In rhythm with the droning's crescendos and diminuendos, the meshwork's light pulsed, breathing a cycle of brightness and darkness in turn. Instantly, I recognized the gritty undertow. It was what I had felt lingering in the atmosphere in the days that led up to the shift, just at a much higher intensity. I hadn't felt it at all since the shift occurred, but now I was somehow seeing its corporeal form, Mom done. Emmy yelled. I reached an open hand behind me, while forcing my eyes away from the churning grey tide below and back towards Regina. When I felt soft wool against my palm, I grabbed it and began pulling the blanket up to me, fingertips becoming stained with wet paint. ACTS 176 protocol fulcrum imminent. 0-1. With the blanket curled under my armpit, I took out the hammer from the tool belt around my waist, storing the flare in its emptied slot for the time being. When I saw the mother slowly inching her way to the mouth of the open garage door, infant still in hand, I redoubled my efforts. 3 nails hammered through the wall and the wool to the right of the door frame. 3 identically placed nails hammered to the left. Our makeshift banner was up in bright red paint that contrasted sharply with the pure white blanket. It read, "Please don't jump something happening soon, get inside." But we didn't have the mother's attention, and she was peering over the edge. Furiously, I pulled the flare from Ben's tool belt, lit the end, and held it up through the hole created by the banner that now partly covered the doorframe. ACTS 176 protocol fulcrum imminent. 0-08. She turned her head. The fizzing sparks caught her attention. There was a moment of silent decision. I held my breath. Hesitantly, maybe even reluctantly, she stepped back from the edge, sat down and cradled her infant. Regina watched the exchange intently. We played our hand, showed her that not everyone was following Barrett's dictum blindly. Now it was down to her willingness to defy him. ACTS 176 protocol fulcrum imminent. 0-1. Truthfully, I don't think Barrett had any awareness of the directives that motorized the shift. I think he believed wholeheartedly in every fatalistic word that dribbled from his lips. If he was working under Ulysses, he would have been trying to convince people against jumping, not encouraging it. That'll make more sense in a bit. So acknowledging the heavy irony of it all beforehand, I will admit that what transpired next did actually restore some of my own faith in a God, one invested in maintaining some sense of cosmic justice. The timing of it was just too perfect. Barrett offered his hand to Regina. Initially, I was heartbroken because she grasped it, but Pastor B must have been exceptionally confident in his daughter's loyalty. Where he goes, she'll surely follow, because he did not hold it tightly. The moment he jumped off Regina, threw her body backwards, severing their connection in one brisk motion, Barrett fell and his daughter remained. As the pastor became dimmer on the horizon, one last message transmitted through the receiver of the walkie-talkie. Soto's particles at apotheotic threshold, generating fulcrum. ACTS 176 protocol activated. The droning's volume became deafening and the wave of grey sediment began to approach us rapidly. With a sound like a colossal foghorn swirling around in my ear, I felt my sense of equilibrium recalibrate. When my feet gently drifted from the top of the door frame, I knew to brace myself for impact. The drone's pitch became higher, and its tone transitioned from a thrum to the snapping of electricity. A split second of silence, the eye of the storm. I closed my eyes, then a massive whoosh, the now familiar sensation of my spine slamming into the wood of my door frame, followed by that dense, gritty feeling of the air rubbing against my skin, which faded away quickly before I could even open my eyes. The invisible friction was gone. When I did finally open my eyes, I witnessed a small miracle, Barrett falling from the clouds, splattering into the forested area behind his home. I mentally braced myself, expecting a sort of corpse rain to follow his descent. Given what I saw through the telescope the night prior, every object, animal, and person lost from the shift, all motionless on the same sheet of atmosphere in the starry night sky. Surely they would fall too, I thought, unlocked from their stasis, and with the world reverted to normal, but nothing else fell. Instead, when I lifted my head to peer into the sky above, prone on my doorstep, I saw our street was contained within a translucent yellow-tinged dome, a membranous half-sphere that seemed to evaporate slowly into the surrounding air like boiling honey, excluding Pastor B. Of course, he was the only one that came back to Earth. Not Ben, not Mr. Baker, not even Janili. Somehow, he had selected the perfect moment to jump. Perfect, in my opinion, anyway. Barrett didn't fall far enough before the shift reverted to be caught and absorbed into whatever that membrane was. So when the shift did revert, his trajectory reversed, and he promptly began a meteoric descent to the cold, hard ground, rejected by his own rapture, thank God. Once I had confirmed Emmy was okay, I instructed her to go across the street and bring Regina back to our house. When she asked why I wasn't coming with her, I told her I needed to check on Ulysses next door, which was only a partial lie. Even though my suspicions had been mounting during the shift, part of me felt like I'd barge into his home and find the old man dead or alive and scared out of his wits, at which point I could chalk my suspicions up to stress-induced paranoia. Ulysses wasn't dead when arrived, nor was he in his home for that matter, and calling that place a home is a bit misleading. Initially, I didn't plan on including what I found within this post. The shift is perplexing enough on its own. Why include details that only serve to muddy the waters 10 times over? The point was to immortalize a record of my experience on the internet and nothing more. That was the point, when I started at least. The Acts 17:6 epiphany revitalized some lost part of myself that cares about the answers to these impossible questions, and that part of me has redirected the goal of this record, I suppose. I mean, that chapter of the Bible includes men who turn the world upside down. The only mention of the unknown God that there is anywhere in Scripture, and the characters that are worshipping said unknown God, are described to be from Athens. In other words, Greek, like Ulysses. That can't all be coincidence, right? I've come around to the idea that there is something to be gained from sharing everything I can remember, even if I won't be the one around to do anything with the information. So in the interim, since I last posted, I've jotted down everything I can remember about the inside of Ulysses's home. Perhaps you all will see the connective tissue within it that I never could. And the cars. No furniture other than a bed in the corner of the kitchen. Majority of the first floor taken up by some sort of generator. Complicated looking wires and screens and hydraulic presses. When I approached, could almost feel dense, grainy sensation in the air again. Machine wasn't loud, but it was vibrating. Every wall except one was covered in clocks set to different times. Looked like one of those vintage sets that has locations listed underneath each clock. But these didn't have any labels. I'd ballpark 60 or 70 total. There was something drawn on the wall without clocks. An image of a bundle of eyes, almost like a cluster of grapes on top of a metal stalk. High above some city, I did not linger on this image too long because of how it made me feel. Pistol lying on the floor. Not a gun person didn't touch it. No visible blood around the area. On the ceiling, there was a silhouette of a person painted the exact same grey as the wave of sparks. Sediment red line right down the middle, otherwise no features. Looked like Ulysses's frame to me. This next part might be trauma talking, but the silhouette seemed to be flapping like a tarp in the wind. Only the silhouette, none of the surrounding ceiling. Flapping was most intense by the red line, and it almost seemed like the figure was caving in on itself, appeared as if it could swing open from the center like saloon doors if I was able to reach up and push it. There was an overturned desk hidden behind the generator, that I wish I noticed sooner, because I would have maybe had more time with the papers stored inside it. From what I reviewed, most of it seemed like a journal. The parts that weren't formatted like a journal had pictures of chemical structures with names I didn't recognize under them. Soto's is the only one I remember, but that's because it came up in the journals too. But there were many more. Only thing I can recall definitively about the others is that they were all palindromes, i.e. spelled the same word if you read them backwards or forwards, like race car or madam. The journal discussed how the land was fertile. It contained abnormally high levels of Soto's particles on a sheet that had the exact date and time of the shift labeled at the top. He detailed the rite and the reaction. The rite seemed to describe the shift or the circumstances that were required to make it occur. Most of it was completely incomprehensible. A cacophony of numbers and symbols and colors, I do distinctly recall the recurrent image of a rising sun, as well as it saying that the radius would be about a half-mile. The idea of a radius made me think of the membranous honey-colored dome. The reaction seemed to describe the point of the whole damn thing. The mixing Soto's particles with some other material that's confined exclusively to the upper atmosphere was said to promote the apotheotic threshold, but that the nebulous designed these materials to be present but impossibly separate, unless concocted by the rite. Once the rite ended, the reaction would fall to the earth, which could unlock the gates to human transgression. He seemed worried that an excess of organic matter might interfere with the reaction, and that's the last thing I remember before I heard a soft footstep behind me, which was followed by a slight pinch in the side of my neck, and then deep, dreamless sleep. Bum. Emmy, Regina, and I woke up at about the same time the following day, having all experienced a similar, abrupt, and artificial feeling sleep. There was a note on the counter which basically informed me that a large sum of money had been transferred to my bank account, and that same sum would be transferred again on the anniversary of the shift. Every year we kept our mouths shut. If we didn't keep our mouths shut, the note promised swift termination. Our house was spotless. No piano-shaped holes in the roof. All new, pristine furniture. Not even a single mote of dust on any surface. Same with every house on the block except for Ulysses's. His house was just gone. Vanished like it hadn't ever been there in the first place. Far be it worse, Emmy lived a good life, I think. She seemed, if not truly happy, at the very least contented. Married a lovely young man named Thomas. Never had any kids, which I think relates back to the trauma of losing Ben. Essentially, she saw being childless as the only foolproof way to prevent anyone else from experiencing what she had died from pancreatic cancer a few months ago. She didn't seem devastated. Again, she wasn't happy, but she was peaceful. Thomas was there, and that was a blessing. She did not appear take for granted, and that somber note brings the record to date. I don't have too much time left on this earth either. But hell, maybe I'll pursue some of this. Pull on a few loose threads. See what I can dredge up for those who are interested. Nothing better to do while I run out the clock. Before I end, though a word of warning, I've given you all the signs of the Act 176 protocol in motion. If you see them, stay inside. Find a safe place to shift. Don't leave your home for 24 hours. It's not a rapture, it's something else. Human transgression through the gates of the apotheotic threshold. Soto's particles. The influence of the unknown God.